Over the past number of years, the Gold Institute has had a great interest in the case of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. The Institute has been really prescient and at the forefront of providing understanding of his case and the surrounding issues. Here today, we have 4 people from the Institute to discuss the case and to provide a unique perspective into this situation. First, we have Ellie Gold, President and Founder, who has been focusing on government and public policy for the last 2 decades. Also here is Adam Levenger, a Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute, who has worked at the highest level at the Pentagon. Mr. Levenger has conducted diagnostic analyses highlighting emerging strategic problems and opportunities confronting the department's leadership, and identified strategic management issues relating to the long-term military competition between the US and her competitors. He has also developed net assessments and competitive strategies for the Secretary of Defense on the long-term strategic competition between the US and China in the Indian Ocean region and sub-Saharan Africa. Also here is Saul Montes-Bradley, Senior Fellow at the Gold Institute. For nearly 30 years, he has studied the evaluation of terrorism in South America and Middle East and witnessed how misguided policies have enabled and strengthened Islamic National Socialist movements in the Middle East and around the world. Interestingly enough, Saul has also been documenting the misuse of government bureaucracies. And lastly, Neil W. McCabe, newspaper political editor for the Star newspaper group, is an Institute Media Fellow, has been a public affairs NCO in the Army Reserve. McCabe was deployed 15 months to Iraq as a combat historian, in addition to other mobilizations to the 18th Airborne Corporation, Fort Bragg, and the Army Reserve Medical Reserve. Starting with Ellie. Ellie, what is it about Mike Flynn's case that has you so interested in this topic?
First of all, thank you for hosting this, Shana. Sure. You know, it's interesting as we take a look at current events right now, and take a look at all of the generals that we see right now who are coming to the forefront, stating that they are not supporting the president, they're not supporting President Trump. Most recently, I wrote a commentary regarding General Mattis's comments as well. And what we're finding is a certain culture within the Pentagon and within the government that really pushes forth a certain sense of camaraderie. The term that we find being used today is a cabal. People that consistently look out for one another. And what has happened, and what I've noticed over the years, especially looking in defense policy, but it works across the board in government, is that the larger we see government and the larger the government expands, the more corruption that we find in government. What I have noticed over time is, and you have certain people, like Mike Flynn in particular. You have Adam Levenger, who's our senior fellow, who have really seen this level of corruption and said, this has to change. President Trump saw that, and he himself realized that while he's not a politician, he hasn't been in Washington very long, but understands what most of America understands, that with the expansion of government and with the expansion of this bureaucracy comes corruption. And we see that from the case of Mike Flynn, that from the moment that Lieutenant General Flynn has joined onto the Trump campaign, we're not talking about the Trump administration, but from the Trump campaign, even long before that, from the moment that he did not, that he publicly did not see eye to eye with President Obama. There has been a culture to separate Mike Flynn from the government. Why that's important, in particular, as the Institute focuses on defense and foreign policy areas, is that has a direct impact on military strategy. It has a direct impact on government as a whole, which really it's not where it just hurts somebody. It's not one guy drinking himself into a drunken stupor and killing himself from alcohol poisoning, but rather this has a serious impact. And if you're looking at the military side of things in defense or intel, it's very difficult to put together a national security strategy when you have people who are looking out more for themselves and more for this little group within government than for the American people as well.
So Adam, going to you. As a chief strategist at the Office of Net Assessment in the Pentagon, you saw a culture of corruption at senior levels. At the same time, Mike Flynn saw a similar culture in the intelligence community. Fast forward, Trump wins the election in 2016 and asks Mike Flynn to be the national security advisor who brings you on as chief strategist at the National Security Council. Before we get started, what is the Office of Net Assessment and what is their purpose?
So the Office of Net Assessment, I would describe in a nutshell as the highest level strategy office in the Pentagon. And why do we have it? Why does it exist? In 1971, Henry Kissinger brought Andrew Marshall from the RAND Corporation to the NSC. He was essentially my predecessor as a senior director of strategy there. And the reason why is that we were losing the Vietnam War. America's preeminence in the world was eroding vis-a-vis the Soviet Union. And there was a recognition that there needed to be a more grand strategy based upon a strategic assessment of the U.S.-Soviet long-term competition. And so he was brought into the NSC to serve this role, and sort of through almost an accident of history, his good friend James Schlesinger in 1973, when he became Secretary of Defense, brought Marshall to the Pentagon with him. For this reason, the Office of Net Assessment's a bit of a square peg in a round hole because it has its origins at the NSC and is therefore not merely about military strategy, but more about grand strategy. And I don't like the term grand strategy, but really what that means is integrating all levers of national power to achieve not merely a military objective, but a strategic objective.
Okay. So you just told us about this culture of corruption, and tell me about the culture of corruption that you and Mike have found yourselves in the last 3 years.
Yeah, so Mike and I met around 2006, and quite early on, we recognized from two very different poles the same problem. The same pathology was infecting the national security bureaucracy. He, of course, was in intelligence, and while deployed, especially overseas in Iraq and Afghanistan, he noticed two major problems. One was a contractor cronyism that resulted in the U.S. government, military forces, in some respects favoring servicing contractors versus accomplishing the mission. That's one. And then two, we also noticed that there were these entrenched bureaucratic interests. Indeed, not merely about turf, a controlling bureaucratic turf, but also there was an ideological component to it, where there was a aversion to naming the enemy for what it was and understanding its culture, understanding its way of thinking, understanding its way of operations, and then crafting strategies or intelligence operations to aggressively take it on. And so, beginning in 2006, we started our conversation. In 2016, Donald Trump won the presidency. And so this this pathology that we had been discussing for a decade, finally we were in a position to do something about it. And that's why he asked me to come in as his Senior Director for Strategy.
Okay, thank you. Going to Saul. Since 2017, you've been focused on the legal and political aspects of this case. Although you're here to talk about the legal side, your writings have been prescient and called out the steps leading to the actual outcome. Tell us what you saw. Tell us what you thought about it and what you think is going to happen moving forward.
And I do have 8 minutes for this, right?
Well, I wanted to say 8 minutes, yeah.
Let me say first that I did not know General Flynn personally until 2017, but I knew of him long before. And in particular, when he was the newly appointed director of the intelligence agency, there was a hearing in the Senate that called my attention to him more than before. And that's where him and James Comey and Director Clapper were being asked about what had just happened in Benghazi. And Director Clapper gave a lengthy explanation of how this was a spontaneous demonstration with nobody that I knew with 2 working brain cells accepted. And eventually, the general was asked, "Is that what you think?" And he said, "No, this is not our impression. This was a well-orchestrated and well-planned and organized attack. And you should have seen the face of everybody in the room at that moment." I then realized that we were dealing with not your usual bureaucrat. He was willing to go against the official line for the sake of honesty. And it came to me as a singular surprise when reports started coming out on the press about his dealings with Russia and with Turkey, which I thought were ludicrous, and I thought that in some other time in American history, whoever came with such a story without proof would have been laughed out of the room, and instead, his resignation was forced. The entire process, once one takes a look at it, began really in late 2015, accelerated in 2016, and became morbid around February of 2017. A narrative was created, much of it curiously aligning with an Islamist movement's denunciations of General Flynn, and for lack of a better term, the fabrication of a legal case began. I remember when Sally Yates went to the White House counsel with her preoccupation that the general might be violating a law that has never been put into place or unconstitutional, and that in any case, if that was the case, I think every politician since the 1940s has been violating it routinely. If we think of President Obama meeting with people in Milan and decrying President Trump's policies in foreign forums, well, that would be a violation of that Logan Act too, wouldn't it? Or John Kerry meeting with Margarita Mogherini and with members of the Iran's government that are listed as terrorists by the State Department. Well, that certainly would be a violation too, but nobody mentioned it. So that is what led me to look at it from the point of view of legal corruption, which is the existence of ambiguous laws that people apply arbitrarily. And essentially, all of us, at one time or another, have violated those laws knowingly or unknowingly. And any of us can at any point be dragged to a federal court to our financial ruin.
So going forward, what do you see happening?
What I see happening is, number one, we have oral arguments, I believe, this Friday coming up. I can see no legal or rational reason for the appeals court to do anything other than grant the writ of mandamus and end this circus. If they do, and if the entire court ratifies it, it will go to the Supreme Court. But I see no reason why it should. From a rational standpoint, the US is not France. In France, judges investigate and prosecute. In the US, they are arbiters of law. And all they have to do is adjudicate the questions of law that the parties bring to them. When the parties decide there is no longer a conflict, the judge doesn't have to decide whether it ends or not. It ended. By virtue of the Justice Department withdrawing the charges and the defense agreeing to it, there is no longer a case. Everything else is just a fanciful fabrication.
Thank you, Saul. Neil, you are a US Media Fellow. Welcome to the Institute.
Good to be home.
Yeah. You've been paying attention to the Flynn case. As someone who has spent so much time in media and print and TV, what do you think the media infatuation with the Flynn case is?
Well, I think for a lot of reporters, it's about a scalp. Reporters love taking down a scalp, and it's exciting. And there's a bloodlust. There's a baying. When I was at the hearings right after the Jeff Sessions confirmation hearings, when 3 or 4 CNN reporters started ganging up on Senator Grassley, who was then chairman of the committee, and they started asking him about all these questions from the dossier, and it was like, I didn't even know I barely knew what the dossier was. It's like they're talking about what about Trump and the hotel room being blackmailed, and Grassley he's like, what are you talking about? But it was like this hunt, and you can see them, the way they go after the president. I know the man who's the only reporter, as far as I can tell, President Barack Obama was interrupted once in 8 years. And it was by my dear friend Neil Monroe, who was covering the White House for Daily Caller. And the uproar, because he had dared to interrupt President Barack Obama. And he used to give these press conferences, right, where it would be he'd answer 8 questions an hour. It'd be like, he'd take us down these he'd take it for 20 minutes, he'd take us down Tobacco Road as he sort of meandered, just sort of lulling us into like a coma with these answers. And Neil Monroe dared to interrupt him. And they wanted to pull his press pass. People were wondering, how did this guy even get in the White House? Well, when was the last time candidate Trump or President Trump has ever not been interrupted? So I think a lot of the stuff is there's that, and it's part of the sort of this kill culture. But there's more things at stake with Flynn. There's a story that has nothing to do with Flynn that I want to share with you, right? So I'm covering it's a Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders Democratic debate in Iowa. Afterwards, I see one of the senior guys from Bernie Sanders at the hotel bar. I go up to him and I say to him, why are you guys giving Hillary Clinton a hall pass on the emails? Doesn't make sense to me. You've got her dead to rights. And he said to me 2 things. The first thing is, if you attack Hillary Clinton, she plays the victim so effectively that even though he's Bernie Sanders socialist, he would get painted as another right-wing nut because of the way the Clintons are so effective at playing the victim. The second thing he said to me was, the FBI is investigating this, and it will take time. And his quote to me was, quote, either we have an FBI or we don't, unquote. And so the Bernie Sanders campaign was relying on the integrity of the FBI to do its job, which seemed, I was like, okay, that's fine, because back then, it was, early 2016, I was still young enough so that I believed in the FBI. And now we know that the FBI is now something so completely different. And when I think about the Flynn case, I also think about the Dreyfus case. And the Dreyfus case, where you had the Jewish French army officer who was railroaded, sentenced to Devil's Island.
What year was this?
It would have been late 19th century? Was it?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
post Napoleon III.
1890s.
Yeah, 1890s. Okay, so this would be in the run-up as the Kaiser is coming up, and so this would be 20. So it'd be 25 years before World War I.
Okay.
And of course, it was exposed, right? That phrase "j'accuse," right? Emile Zola wrote the article where he said "j'accuse," and he listed all of the people who were part of railroading Dreyfus, and Dreyfus was sprung, but it spoke to a sickness inside the French leadership that was not addressed. Dreyfus was freed, but the reforms necessary were not addressed. And when World War I came and the guns of August, France was not ready. And France nearly perished. And I think, hopefully General Michael T. Flynn will be able to rebuild his life and his family. And I think that people have learned these lessons of what happened to him, how he was railroaded. And of course, remember, he had his top secret clearance, right? Sensitive compartmentalized information clearance. The highest clearance we have was renewed in April of 2016. In August of 2016, he's a Russian spy. And it's like the FBI says this, right? What happened in the intervening 4 months is he joined the Trump campaign. And so this is a problem. So I think personally, and I hope very much, that General Flynn and his family are able to put their lives back together again in his career, that he can serve. But we have to go back to Dreyfus. What was exposed in the Flynn case is the sickness and the corruption and the passion that people had to keep the con going. They knew it was a fraud. They knew it was a lie. And they kept it going. And when you said to people, how could you railroad this man? Their answer to you is, well, we had to railroad him because we needed to stop him and we needed to stop Trump. And so that the rules and the laws and the Constitution and everything that we thought we all agreed on, it turns out that the founding consensus is no longer even operating. And I think in the end, that's what we have to sort of rebuild out of the rubble of the Flynn case.
Yeah, thank you for that comparison.
If I may add just a little point, because you made a very important point. In April, he has his SCI clearance renewed. In December, he is a Russian spy. On January 4th, he is cleared by the FBI because they couldn't find a parking ticket. And on January 5, the president in the Oval Office is asking the director of the FBI, what are you doing about it? And suddenly, this new by-the-book investigation springs out of nowhere with no predicate and becomes the three-ring circus that we have witnessed for the past 2.5 years. So, what you're saying, what happened, it's patently obvious once you know the chronology of events.
Or think of the dozens or hundreds of people who knew exactly what the frame-up and the railroading of General Flynn was. And not only did they say nothing, because there's always the conspiracy of silence, but there were people who actively kept the con going.
Yes.
May I ask a question?
Sure.
So, Adam, everything that we just heard yourself speak about, that Saul and Neil talk about, what I find that most people don't really understand is people understand, they've been paying attention to the news, whether they're watching Fox News or OAN or CNN and MSNBC, they all have an understanding of the Flynn case. Okay? For the people who are really paying attention, they have an understanding of the Levenger case. But what I find that people really don't have a good, solid understanding is what was going on in the 3-4 minutes that we have, or that I'm taking, is what was happening at the Pentagon within the intelligence community that really got people so concerned, that was maybe a little bit more in depth, that had people so concerned that they would go to the lengths that Neil McCabe just spoke about. That is not just let's ask for his resignation, let's get his resignation, because that happens all the time in government. But what is it that they would go to such a lengths where they would have meetings and actually take notes about, are we trying to get him fired? What is our ultimate goal here? That means that there were a lot of people at really high levels that really felt threatened. What was that? Explain that to me, because you clearly, whether you saw it or experienced the Flynn side of things, really have a better understanding than almost anybody that will watch this video.
So I joined the Pentagon in 2003, and so I got to watch the transition from George W. Bush administration to the Obama administration. And then I got to see the transition from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. What happened in the Bush to Obama transition is that most of the political types, the political operators from the administration in the Pentagon left. And they went off and did something else. I would say 2 years, the penultimate and ultimate year of the Obama administration, I witnessed something extraordinary that I had not seen before. The embedding of Obama loyalists, those who I would say supported the Obama doctrine, and the Obama doctrine, as I saw it implemented, created and implemented, was something that viewed American primacy with shame. Let's just say that. That's the overarching theme. America had to prostrate itself to the world, has to apologize for our imperialist path. This is the narrative of the Obama doctrine. General Flynn, and I would say most Americans from the statistics I've seen, don't believe that America needs to apologize to the world for our history. We all recognize that America is a work in progress. We've been in a work in progress from our founding. We do make mistakes. We try to learn from our mistakes. But we're the best country in the world, and we have nothing to apologize to, particularly to authoritarian regimes, which became a hallmark of the Obama doctrine. General Flynn and myself, we were targeted because we did not support the Obama doctrine, ideologically, politically, or bureaucratically. We absolutely did not support it. And I would say there's almost a Clinton corollary to the Obama doctrine, which is, again, something I viewed in graduate school, was that with the end of the Cold War, with the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991, we had what was called a peace dividend. And this peace dividend, as it translated through the defense industry, resulted in outsourcing lots of government functions to private sector entities. And there are few families, probably no family in American history, that has more benefited from presiding over that peace dividend, presiding over enriching contractors, the Beltway, consultants. Washington went from being a sleepy southern town with northern charm to being technological, legal, lobbying, money place, money locale. And the Clintons benefited more from that than anyone. Certainly the Obamas, they're not moving back to Chicago. They bought a mansion in Upper Northwest. It's a very nice house. They're working for Netflix. They are essentially taking a page from the Clinton playbook. So, to answer your question in a nutshell, Flynn and I believed in American primacy, and we were going to do something about it. That threatened the contracting class, who were getting rich because of the Clinton corollary of the Obama doctrine. It threatened the national security bureaucracy, which had been infiltrated by Obama loyalists at the highest levels. So, in other words, we threatened pretty much the whole system.
Is this something that you see only in the Obama era, or has this, I hate using this term, but this cabal, has it been there even during the Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the Bush, and so on, just in a different, it manifested itself in a different fashion?
I've studied it to a certain extent. I believe historians 100 years from now will look back on this time and see what took place during the Obama administration as unprecedented. It was a very deliberate destruction of bureaucratic enemies inside the system, implanting loyalists. If the Obama administration had only expended the time and energy going after America's strategic competitors like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, radical Islam, that they spent going after their enemies inside the system, inside the U.S. national security bureaucracy, we would be in a very different place, a much better place today.
Okay.
Thank you all for coming. Really appreciate it. I believe that this too shall pass. There's a light at the end of every tunnel. Saul, can I invite you to give the closing remarks, since you are so involved in the intimate details of this case?
Well,
anything that we can finish up?
I hope the light at the end of the tunnel is not the headlamp of the oncoming train. I have to agree with what was just said about the years of the Obama administration. Several years ago, I wrote a piece, The Dismal Eight. I think is the most corrupt and illegal period in modern American history. From the extrajudicial bankruptcy of GM to the use of the government as an extortion racket, how 20 billion were extorted out of BP without the intervention of the courts, to what we just heard about the national security establishment. And it is difficult. It puts us in a very, very, very difficult place. We have seen a lot of progress in the last 4 years, but not nearly enough. And in the case of General Flynn, and I keep telling people, if what happened to him can happen to a highly decorated 3-star general who once headed one of our premier intelligence services, nobody is safe. And we need to fix this and fix it in a hurry. I trust that his exoneration, which I consider complete the moment that these items were exposed by the Justice Department and the charges withdrawn, will become a fact in the public domain eventually, and that the people who were involved in this kind of activity will deservedly be on the receiving end of the wrath of an American public that is generally apathetic about these things, but once woken up to the facts, they are very unforgiving as well. So I trust that this will happen. I expect that in the next 4 years, we will see a lot of cleaning up in our bureaucracies of people that even today, not only in government, but from October 2015, there was an effort of the Obama administration to embed their operatives in the press, in newly created national security and intelligence departments in media across the country, by people who had zero experience on the field. In some cases, recent graduates. In others, people who were writing about recipes, suddenly as very well-paid pundits that did nothing more than add their names to what they were receiving from the Obama policy groups. Hopefully, we will clean this up. I am hopeful.
Great, thank you, Saul.
And
I'm curious to know, Neil, what your thoughts are about the media and their aversion to President Trump and anything related to President Trump. We see now. One can make the case, and I don't suspect that this is too conspiratorial, that the markets had gone down due to coronavirus. The unemployment has skyrocketed due to coronavirus. The numbers of deaths and coronavirus cases were diminishing, and at that point in time, we see a shift to riots and protests, unlike we've ever seen before. What is it with the infatuation of the left, and in particular the media, that they will do anything possible to really hurt this president's chances of re-election? And I will just add that I live in Baltimore. My home is in Baltimore County, not Baltimore City. But we had riots not long ago due to a similar case, and never once did we see such a response from the left. With the riots that we had, they weren't as extreme as they are today. The same thing with Ferguson, Missouri, and so on.
Well, if you think about it, you sort of take a long view, right? So from 1932 to 1968, right? The Democrats and the left controlled the White House, all but for the Eisenhower years, right? Eisenhower ran for president, basically saying we're going to roll back the New Deal and we're going to roll back communist control of Eastern Europe. And as soon as he was elected, they just ignored them.
Right.
They just said, it's just like whatever. Nixon comes in '68. Nixon tries to actually change things. He had an amazing reform program. I would suggest that much of the Reagan magisterium was actually trying to finish the incomplete Nixon magisterium. Half the Reagan administration worked for Nixon, which is why they survived Iran-Contra, because they had been through this drill before, and they said, you know what, we actually went through Watergate, and this is how we're going to do it differently. But you see, Nixon, the American people sent Nixon to Washington to fix it. He tried to fix it. In less than 2 years after he won 49 states, they railroaded him out of town.
Yep.
You look at what happened with the American people sent Ronald Reagan. 6 years after Watergate, Reagan is president. People think of it as two different eras, but really it's just a very short period of time, Nixon to Reagan. So the American people said Reagan has a very aggressive program of reform. We're finally going to change this thing. We realize we have to attack the courts and we have to do all these things. And not only does Washington, but even the Republican leadership throws sands in the gear. And then you have Newt Gingrich and the contract with America. And then they throw sand. Gingrich, not only was Gingrich, you look at what Gingrich is able to accomplish in 3 years. 3 years, not 4, 3 years, right? Gingrich, not only did he work against the Democratic president, Gingrich was going against the most effective Democratic president there had been since FDR. Gingrich had 20 fewer seats than Paul Ryan. And Gingrich is gone, right? It was Joe Scarborough, now does Morning Joe, led a coup against Gingrich because he was ineffective. He's probably the most effective speaker in our lifetime. But each time the American people send people to Washington to fix it. You had the Tea Party in 2010, right, which created the largest House majority in largest House Republican majority in 80 years, since 1946. What was accomplished from it? Nothing.
Right.
And so the American people, they say, well, we can't do anything because we don't have the Senate. So the American people give the Republicans the Senate. They say, well, we can't do anything. We have the House and the Senate, but we can't do anything unless we have the White House. And so then you give them the White House. So now the American people not only sent a very tough man who was a businessman to Donald J. Trump, they sent like the angriest, meanest jerk they could find. They said, we hate Washington so much that we're going to send Donald Trump to fix you people. He's 5 months in office, and he's got a special prosecutor on him. Donald Trump hasn't spent 3 years being president. He spent 3 years trying to stay president.
Right.
And so what happens is the American people keep trying to fix Washington, but Washington keeps fighting back. And the question is, why are the reporters? The reporters are part of the Washington establishment. And it's like, because you cannot get your kid into Sidwell Friends or Georgetown Prep if you are supporting conservative agendas or working for a conservative media outlet. And one thing I've noticed too is, maybe you've noticed it also, is that it's no longer ideological, left, right, taxes, not taxes, abortion, not abortion. It's, are you crazy? Are you not crazy? Right. And basically you're just saying, are you a normal American who opposes Trump, or are you one of those freak weirdos? And it's just Trump supporters are completely marginalized. And so the question you have to ask is, right, how many times can you suppress the American people who are trying to reign in Washington before the whole thing falls apart?
Right. Saul, what about this case in particular? I mean, I understand why you thought that Mike was innocent and why these charges were ludicrous. I understand that. But what was it that made you so prescient in 2017 when you started writing it? On the Gold Institute website, goldiis.org, you'll find the Flynn article that you posted. It's actually on our homepage. What was it that made it so that you were seemingly ahead of the curve? And again, I don't want to suggest that there are a number of institutions in Washington that have been involved in the Flynn case from our perspective. Judicial Watch is one of them, but we are not Judicial Watch. We don't do the work that Judicial Watch is. So, what is it that you saw that makes your work at the Gold Institute so prescient?
I saw what Dean was talking about just a moment ago, because all of this is very closely interrelated. When I started writing about the Flynn case in April of 17, people stopped talking to me in Washington. How dare I? Of course, at about that time, Tony Ferrante was retiring from the West Wing, and his retirement party was being attended by every journalist between Baltimore and Richmond.
Right.
Because the tightness of these people with the press is a 1-2 punch that is very difficult to overcome. So, what did I see? I saw how shall I say this? A culture of corruption dominating every aspect of our government. And anybody who was trying to scratch the paint was being personally persecuted, their lives destroyed. Mike Flynn is one among many. I've seen at least a dozen cases in the FBI of supervisory agents who were not willing to participate in this feast. And not only were they fired, they were persecuted and destroyed. If one of them couldn't get a job anywhere, when he finally got a job in a McDonald's,
right,
within a week, a couple of FBI agents showed up and had him fired. It was the malignity of these people, the passion with which they seek to destroy anybody who questions their wisdom,
right,
is something I've seen in South America when I was growing up, not something I ever expected to see in the US, and that is what I saw. And that is why Mike Flynn became more of a symbol than a person to me.
got it.
Is this the first time that you've seen that in this country? Or?
There's a little bit of it during I love history. during the Wilson administration. There's quite a bit of it during the Wilson administration. There is a lot of it during the Roosevelt administration. Nobody had been able to exercise such a stronghold on every aspect of the bureaucracy since until the 8 years of Obama.